When I turned 30, I expected at least a text message. Maybe a phone call. At minimum, some acknowledgement that 3 decades of my life mattered to the people who raised me. Instead, I got silence. Complete deafening silence. And then, exactly 2 weeks later, my mother sent me a payment request for $2,000. Per person. $4,000 total, since Ryan and I were apparently counted as separate wallets. The subject line read, Dad's 60th celebration, mandatory contribution. I stared at that email for a full 5 minutes, my coffee going cold in my hand, wondering if I'd somehow slipped into an alternate universe where this made sense. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started, to the moment I should have seen it all coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It was a Tuesday morning in late August when I started planning my 30th birthday. I know that sounds early, planning something 2 months in advance, but 30 felt significant. It felt like a threshold, a moment worth marking. I'd spent my 20s building a career, finding Ryan, creating a life in Portland that actually felt like mine. I wanted to celebrate that with the people who mattered most. I was sitting at my desk in our apartment, the morning light filtering through the windows overlooking the Pearl District, when I started drafting the text to my family group chat. Nothing elaborate, just a simple message letting them know I wanted to plan something special for my birthday in October. Maybe a dinner at Andina, this beautiful Peruvian place I'd been wanting to try. Nothing fancy, just family gathering together to mark the occasion. I typed it out 3 different ways before settling on the most casual version possible. Hey everyone! Can't believe I'm turning 30 in October. Would love to have you all up in Portland for dinner on the 14th. Let me know if that works for your schedules. I added a little cake emoji at the end, trying to keep it light and fun. The response was immediate from Ryan, who was sitting across from me working on architectural plans. He looked up from his laptop and smiled. I'm already there, obviously. Going to make you the embarrassing birthday video you deserve. I laughed, feeling warm and hopeful. Then I waited for my family to respond. My phone sat there on the desk, screen dark and quiet. An hour passed. Then 2. By lunchtime, I'd seen that little indicator showing everyone had read the message, but nobody had replied. Not my mother Karen, not my father Bob, not my younger brother Brandon. Just 3 little check marks confirming they'd all seen it, and collectively decided it didn't warrant a response. Ryan noticed me checking my phone for the dozenth time. They're probably just busy, he said gently. Give them time. I nodded, but something cold had settled in my chest. It was a familiar feeling, one I'd spent years trying to talk myself out of acknowledging. The feeling of being secondary, of being the child who existed in the margins of the family story while Brandon occupied the center. By evening, my mother finally responded. That's nice, dear. We'll see what we can do. 5 words. No enthusiasm, no questions about the restaurant or what time or who else might be coming. Just a vague, non-committal nothing that felt worse than silence. My father didn't respond at all. Brandon sent a thumbs up emoji 3 days later. I tried to tell myself it was fine. People are busy. October was still weeks away. They'd come around. But deep down I already knew how this story ended, because I'd lived versions of it my entire life. Brandon Palmer is 27 years old, 3 years younger than me, and he has never had to work for my parents' attention. It's just always been there, abundant and unconditional, like oxygen or sunlight. When we were kids, I was the one who brought home straight A's, who played varsity soccer, who made honor roll every semester. Brandon barely graduated high school. But somehow my achievements were expected, unremarkable, while his mere existence was celebrated. When I got accepted to Oregon State for computer science, my parents took me to dinner at a chain restaurant and split an appetizer. When Brandon got accepted to community college 2 years later, after failing out of his first attempt, they threw him a party. When I graduated with honors and landed my first job at a tech startup in Portland, they said congratulations over the phone. When Brandon got his real estate license, my mother cried with pride and my father bought him a new car to help him look professional for clients. I learned early that pointing this out made me the problem. I was being jealous, ungrateful, unable to be happy for my brother's successes. So I stopped pointing it out. I swallowed it down and told myself I was independent, that I didn't need the validation. I built my life in Portland, 2 hours away from Eugene, and I pretended the distance was just geographical. Ryan met my family for the first time 2 years ago at Thanksgiving. Afterward, during the drive back to Portland, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Do they always talk to you like that?" "Like what?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what he meant. "Like you're an afterthought. Like nothing you say is quite as interesting as whatever Brandon's talking about." I'd laughed it off, made some excuse about family dynamics, but Ryan had seen it clearly in a single afternoon. The way my mother's face lit up whenever Brandon entered a room. The way my father asked him detailed questions about his life while giving me surface-level nods. The way I'd learned to make myself smaller, quieter, less demanding of space or attention. As September rolled into October, I followed up about my birthday dinner twice more in the family group chat. Both times I got vague responses. "We'll try to make it work. Let's see how the schedule shakes out." It's a bit of a drive on a weeknight. Never a clear yes or no, just an endless maybe that kept me dangling. A week before my birthday, I called my mother directly. I was walking through Waterfront Park during my lunch break, watching the Willamette River flow past, trying to sound casual and unbothered. "Hey Mom, just wanted to confirm about dinner on the 14th. I made reservations for 6 people. You, Dad, Brandon, Ryan, and me, plus I invited Aunt Linda." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh honey, I meant to talk to you about that. Your father and I don't think we can make it up to Portland that night. It's just such a long drive after work, and your father's been so tired lately." My stomach dropped. "What about the weekend? We could do it Saturday instead?" "Well, here's the thing. Brandon's been going through a really difficult time with work. The real estate market's been tough, and he's been feeling really down. We've been trying to be around for him more. Your father thinks we should have a quiet weekend at home, just keep things low-key." I stopped walking. "So you're not coming to my birthday? We'll celebrate another time, sweetie. You understand. 30's not really a big milestone anyway. It's not like 21 or 50. We'll do something when things calm down with your brother." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask when things were ever calm with Brandon, when his crisis had ever not taken priority. Instead, I heard myself say, "Okay, sure, no problem," in that same placating voice I'd been using my entire life. That night, Ryan found me sitting on our apartment balcony, staring out at the city lights. When I told him, his jaw tightened. "That's not okay, Jess. You know that's not okay, right?" I shrugged. "It's just how they are." "No," he said firmly. "It's how they choose to be. There's a difference." My 30th birthday fell on a Saturday. Ryan woke me up with breakfast in bed, and a poorly wrapped present that turned out to be a vintage film camera I'd been eyeing for months. Taylor, my closest friend since college, organized a surprise brunch with a dozen of my Portland friends at a cafe in the Pearl District. We spent the afternoon at Powell's Books, then had an incredible dinner at Ondina, the restaurant I'd originally wanted to take my family to. It was a beautiful day. I was surrounded by people who loved me, who'd shown up without being begged or convinced. But there was a hollow space at the center of it all, a space shaped like my family's absence. My mother sent a text at 9 p.m. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Happy birthday, sweetheart. Hope you had a nice day. No phone call. No card. My father didn't message at all. Brandon sent a gif of a dancing cake at 11:30, clearly an afterthought. I cried that night after Ryan fell asleep. Not loud, dramatic crying, just silent tears soaking into my pillow. I cried for the little girl who'd learned her accomplishments didn't matter as much as her brother's failures. I cried for every birthday and graduation and promotion that had been met with lukewarm acknowledgement. And I cried because I knew I'd probably forgive them, make excuses for them, and let it happen again. But then came the email. It arrived on a Wednesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after my birthday. I was getting ready for work, drinking coffee in my kitchen, scanning through emails on my phone. The subject line made me open it immediately. Dad's 60th birthday celebration. Important information. My mother had written a novel. The email was formatted with bullet points in bold text, like a corporate memo. She explained that my father's 60th birthday was coming up in December, a truly significant milestone that deserved a proper celebration. They'd rented the ballroom at Willamette Valley Country Club. They'd hired a caterer, a band, a photographer. They were inviting over 100 people, friends and family and colleagues from my father's years working as an accountant. And then came the part that made my hand shake so badly I almost dropped my phone. We've calculated the costs and divided them equally among family. Your contribution, including Ryan's portion, will be $4,000. We'll need payment by November 1st to confirm final numbers with the vendors. You can Venmo me or write a check. Below is the breakdown of expenses. I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding. $4,000. $2,000 per person. For a party I hadn't been consulted about, at a venue I hadn't chosen, for a guest list I had no input on. And this was sent not as a request, not as a question, but as an invoice. A mandatory contribution. Ryan came into the kitchen, saw my face, and immediately took the phone from my hand. He read the email in silence, his expression moving from confusion to disbelief to anger. "This is insane," he said finally. "They skipped your birthday entirely and now they want $4,000? I couldn't speak. I was doing the math in my head. $4,000 from Ryan and me. Probably another $2,000 from Brandon, though knowing my parents, they'd likely cover his portion or give him a payment plan. Maybe contributions from extended family. They were planning a party that likely cost upwards of $20,000 and expecting their children to fund it." I sat at my desk that afternoon, staring at the email, reading it over and over until the words started to blur together. The breakdown of expenses was itemized with clinical precision. Venue rental $5,000. Catering for 120 guests at $80 per plate. Open bar package $3,000. Live band $2,000. Professional photographer and videographer $1,800. Floral arrangements $1,200. Custom cake $400. Party favors $600. The list went on and on, each line item more extravagant than the last. What struck me wasn't just the total cost, though that was staggering enough. It was the assumption embedded in every word of that email. The assumption that I would simply pay. That my money was their money. That my 30th birthday could pass unacknowledged, but my father's 60th required my financial sacrifice. There was no please, no would you be willing, no recognition that this was a massive ask. Just an invoice with a due date. I called Taylor during my lunch break, needing to hear someone else confirm I wasn't losing my mind. We met at a coffee shop near my office, one of those places with exposed brick and local art on the walls. I showed her the email before I even said hello. She read it in silence, her eyes getting wider with each line. Finally, she looked up at me. "Jess, this is absolutely unhinged. Please tell me you're not actually considering paying this." "I don't know what I'm considering," I admitted. "It's my dad's birthday. If I don't pay, I'm going to be the villain. You know how my family works." Taylor leaned forward, her expression serious. "How your family works is that they treat you like an ATM with a guilt button. When was the last time they helped you with anything? Financially or otherwise?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't think of a single example. When Ryan and I had moved into our apartment 3 years ago, we'd done it entirely ourselves. My parents hadn't offered to help with the deposit or the moving costs. When I'd bought my car 2 years ago, I'd saved every penny on my own. When I'd needed emergency dental work last year that insurance didn't fully cover, I'd paid out of pocket. My parents had never once offered financial help, never contributed to my life in any material way. But Brandon, I knew from my mother's casual mentions, still had his car insurance paid by my parents. They'd covered his rent for 6 months last year when real estate sales were slow. They'd paid for his real estate courses, his licensing fees, even his professional headshots. The support flowed in one direction, always toward him, never toward me. "They didn't even send you a birthday card," Taylor said quietly. "They didn't call. They didn't show up. And now, they want $4,000? Jess, you have to see how messed up this is." I knew she was right. But knowing something intellectually and feeling empowered to act on it are two different things entirely. I'd spent 30 years learning to minimize my needs, to not rock the boat, to keep the peace at my own expense. The thought of saying no made my chest tight with anxiety. That evening, I tried to talk to Ryan about it rationally. We sat on our couch, takeout containers spread across the coffee table, and I attempted to play devil's advocate for my own exploitation. "Maybe it's not that unreasonable," I started. "It is a big milestone. 60 is significant. Ryan put down his fork and looked at me with an expression I'd come to recognize. It was his "I love you but you're being ridiculous" face. Just listen to yourself. You're trying to justify them demanding $4,000 after they completely blew off your birthday. That's not normal. That's not okay. But if I don't contribute, they'll never forgive me. Brandon will probably get his portion reduced or covered, and I'll be the selfish daughter who couldn't support her own father's celebration. So let them think that, Ryan said. You're not selfish. You're the opposite of selfish. You've spent your entire life bending over backward for people who don't appreciate it. When does it stop? I didn't have an answer for that. Instead, I logged into my bank account and looked at my savings. $4,000 would wipe out a significant chunk of what Ryan and I had been saving for a down payment on a house. We'd been carefully setting aside money for 2 years, dreaming of buying our own place, maybe something with a small yard where we could eventually have kids. $4,000 was a month and a half of that dream, handed over for a party I didn't even want to attend. Over the next few days, I started asking careful questions. I called my Aunt Linda, my mother's older sister, who'd always been more straightforward with me than my parents ever were. "Did you get an email about Dad's party?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I did," she said, and I could hear the disapproval in her voice. "Your mother called me afterward to explain. Apparently, she and Bob decided they wanted this big celebration, but didn't want to pay for it themselves. They're hitting up all the kids and some extended family for contributions." "Did she ask you for money?" $2,500, Linda said flatly. "For me and David." I told her we'd think about it, but between you and me, Jess, I think it's inappropriate. Your parents aren't struggling financially. Your father has a decent pension. They own their home outright. If they want a $20,000 party, they should pay for it themselves. Hearing Linda say it out loud, hearing the criticism from someone else in the family, made something shift in my chest. I wasn't crazy. This wasn't normal. Other people could see how wrong this was. "I haven't decided if I'm going to contribute yet," I admitted. There was a pause. Linda's voice got softer. "Honey, I love your parents, they're my family, but I've watched how they treat you compared to Brandon for years. You don't owe them this. You don't owe them anything, actually. You've been a wonderful daughter, and they've taken that for granted." After we hung up, I sat in my car in the parking garage at work and cried. Not the silent tears from my birthday, but deep shaking sobs that came from somewhere I'd been keeping locked away. I cried for every time I'd been overlooked. Every time my achievements were met with indifference while Brandon's mediocrity was celebrated. Every time I'd made myself smaller, quieter, less demanding, hoping that maybe if I asked for less, they'd appreciate what I did offer. But they never had. And they never would. That night, I started drafting my response. I wrote 7 different versions. The first was angry, calling them out for every slight and disappointment. I deleted it. The second was overly apologetic, agreeing to pay but expressing hurt feelings. I deleted that too. The third through sixth were various attempts at finding middle ground, at being diplomatic while still setting boundaries. Ryan read each draft, offering feedback. "You're still apologizing," he'd say. "You're still taking responsibility for their feelings. Try again." Finally, on the 7th attempt, I wrote something that felt true. It was direct without being cruel. It stated facts without drowning in emotion. It set a clear boundary without over-explaining or justifying. "Mom and Dad," I wrote, "I received your email regarding financial contributions for Dad's 60th birthday party. After careful consideration, I won't be able to contribute the requested amount. Ryan and I have our own financial goals and obligations, and $4,000 isn't feasible for us right now. I hope you have a wonderful celebration, and I look forward to seeing you there. Love, Jess." I read it out loud to Ryan. He nodded slowly. "It's good. It's clear. You don't owe them more explanation than that." But I couldn't send it. Not yet. Because I knew what would happen next. I knew my mother would call, crying. I knew my father would give me the silent treatment. I knew Brandon would somehow become involved, probably taking their side, making me out to be the selfish one. I knew extended family members would hear a version of events that painted me as ungrateful and difficult. I saved the email as a draft and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake listening to the sounds of the city through our bedroom window, Ryan's breathing steady beside me, and I thought about all the times I'd given in to keep the peace. All the times I'd swallowed my hurt and written the check, made the drive, showed up when no one showed up for me. The next morning, a Friday, my mother called. I was in a meeting, so I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She called again during lunch. Again, no message. By the time I left work, I had 6 missed calls from her and 2 from my father, which was unusual. My father rarely called about anything. I sat in my car and listened to my breathing, my hand hovering over my phone. Finally, I called her back. She answered on the first ring. "Jessica, thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you all day. I know, sorry. I was in meetings. What's going on?" "What's going on is that we haven't received your confirmation about the party contribution. The deadline for the deposit is approaching, and we need to give the venue final numbers." I took a deep breath. "About that, I was actually going to email you, but since you called, I can tell you now. Ryan and I aren't going to be able to contribute $4,000. It's just not in our budget right now." Silence. Long, heavy silence that pressed against my ear like a physical weight. "What do you mean it's not in your budget?" Her voice had gone cold. "You and Ryan both have good jobs. You live in that expensive apartment downtown. We're saving for a house," I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "We have financial goals, and $4,000 is a significant amount of money. This is your father's 60th birthday, Jessica. This is important. We're family." There it was. The guilt card played exactly as I predicted. I felt the old familiar tug, the instinct to apologize and cave and make everyone else comfortable at my own expense. But something was different this time. Maybe it was turning 30. Maybe it was Ryan's unwavering support. Maybe it was just exhaustion from a lifetime of being last priority. "I understand it's important," I said carefully, "and I'm planning to be there to celebrate. But I can't contribute that amount of money. Can't or won't." The sharpness in her voice cut through the phone line. "Does it matter? Either way, the answer is no." I heard her inhale sharply. "After everything we've done for you, after all the years we supported you, raised you, paid for your education." I almost laughed at that. "You supported me the legally required amount for a minor child. You didn't pay for my college. I had scholarships and loans that I'm still paying off. You didn't help with my apartment or my car. I've been financially independent since I was 18. That's not the point," she snapped. "The point is we're family, and family helps each other. Your brother already committed to his portion." Of course he did, I thought bitterly. Or more likely, they told me he'd committed while planning to pay it for him. "Brandon's financial situation is different from mine," I said. "That's between you and him." My answer is still no. Your father is going to be very disappointed in you. Then Dad can call me himself and tell me that, I replied, and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I have to go, Mom. I'll talk to you later." I hung up before she could respond, and my hand was shaking so badly I had to set the phone down. I'd done it. I'd said no. I'd set a boundary without apologizing, without justifying, without caving to the guilt. And it felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Ryan picked me up from work that evening. We'd planned to drive to Cannon Beach for the weekend, a getaway we'd been looking forward to for weeks. As I got in the car, I told him about the phone call. He reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. We drove west toward the coast, leaving the city behind, and I tried to let the tension drain from my shoulders. My phone buzzed periodically in my purse. Text messages, I assumed, probably from my mother or father or maybe even Brandon. I didn't look. For the first time in my life, I let their demands sit unanswered while I prioritized my own peace. The beach house we'd rented was small but perfect, perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. That night, we built a fire in the fireplace and opened a bottle of wine. Rain pattered against the windows. The ocean roared in the darkness beyond. Finally, I looked at my phone. 14 text messages. I scrolled through them, my stomach knotting with each one. From my mother. "I can't believe you'd be so selfish. Your father worked his entire life to provide for this family, and you can't even help celebrate his milestone birthday. I'm ashamed of you." From my father. "Your mother tells me you're refusing to contribute to my party. I don't understand this behavior, Jessica. This isn't how we raised you." From Brandon. "Hey sis, Mom's really upset. Is it really that big a deal? It's just money. Family should come first." From my mother again. "I've been talking to Aunt Linda and Uncle David. Everyone is contributing except you. You're making yourself look bad. From a number I didn't recognize, probably a family friend my mother had recruited. Hi Jessica. This is Margaret from your parents' church. Your mother mentioned you might need some financial advice regarding family obligations. I'd be happy to chat if you need guidance on budgeting for important family events. I felt sick. My mother had actually reached out to people outside our immediate family, strangers essentially, to pressure me about money. She was building a narrative, painting me as the villain, recruiting an army of guilt. Ryan read over my shoulder. His jaw clenched. This is emotional abuse, Jess. You know that, right? This is manipulation and control. I know, I whispered. I know, but it doesn't make it easier. That weekend at the beach was supposed to be relaxing, but I spent most of it tied to my phone, watching the family drama unfold in real time. My mother had started a family group chat, pointedly excluding me, but Taylor had a mutual cousin who kept her informed, who kept me informed. According to the cousin, my mother was telling everyone that I'd refused to help with the party because I was still bitter about my birthday, that I was jealous of my father getting attention, that Ryan had turned me against my family. None of it was true, but truth didn't seem to matter. The narrative was being written without me, and I was powerless to stop it. I returned to Portland on Sunday evening feeling more exhausted than when I'd left. The beach was supposed to have recharged me, but instead I'd spent 2 days watching my phone like it was a ticking bomb. Each notification another explosion of guilt and manipulation. Ryan carried our bags up to the apartment while I stood in the doorway, unable to shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with my family, and there was no going back from it. Monday morning brought a new development. I was at my desk trying to focus on a product launch timeline when my email pinged. It was from my father, and the subject line read simply, "Disappointed." I felt my stomach drop before I even opened it. Jessica, I have always tried to be a fair and reasonable father. I worked hard to provide for you and your brother, to give you both opportunities one never had. Your mother and I sacrificed so that you could have a good education and a stable home. We never asked for much in return, just basic respect and consideration. Your refusal to contribute to my birthday celebration, especially after the significant expense we incurred raising you, shows a lack of character that I frankly did not expect from my daughter. I am not angry, just deeply disappointed. I hope you will reconsider your decision before it is too late. We raised you better than this. Dad. I read it 3 times, each word landing like a physical blow. The implication was clear. Every dollar they'd spent on me as a child was now a debt I owed. Every meal, every piece of clothing, every school supply was apparently an investment they expected returns on. Never mind that those were legal obligations of parenthood. Never mind that I'd never asked to be born. Never signed a contract promising financial payback for the basic necessities of childhood. I forwarded the email to Ryan without commentary. His response came back within minutes. This is financial abuse disguised as family obligation. You know that, right? But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were still 2 different things. I sat at my desk feeling like a terrible daughter, like maybe I was selfish, like maybe I should just pay the money and make everyone happy. It would be easier. It would restore peace. It would let me go back to being the good daughter who didn't cause problems. Taylor called during my lunch break. I answered, grateful for a friendly voice. Before I could say hello, she jumped in. Okay, I'm going to tell you something and you're going to hate it, but you need to hear it. Your family is abusive. Not physically, but emotionally and financially. They have trained you your entire life to believe that your worth is measured by how much you sacrifice for them. Especially for Brandon. And now they're punishing you for finally setting a boundary. I sat in my car in the parking garage, listening to her words echo in the enclosed space. She was right, and I'd known it on some level for years, but hearing it stated so plainly made it impossible to deny anymore. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Every time my phone buzzes, I feel sick. I can't focus at work. I can't sleep. I keep thinking maybe I should just pay it and be done with it. And what happens next time? Taylor asked. What happens when Brandon needs money for something and they expect you to contribute? What happens at the next family milestone when they've learned they can guilt you into paying for anything? Where does it end, Jess? I didn't have an answer. That week became a blur of increasingly aggressive messages from my family. My mother sent daily texts, each one more pointed than the last. She'd mentioned casually that extended family members had all contributed their portions. She'd send screenshots of the party planning details, the beautiful floral arrangements they'd selected, the elegant menu, as if to remind me what I was refusing to support. She'd forward me emails from the country club about payment deadlines, with brief notes like, final deposit due Friday. Still time to change your mind. Brandon called me on Wednesday evening. I almost didn't answer, but some misplaced sense of sibling loyalty made me pick up. Hey Jess, he started, his voice overly casual. Mom wanted me to reach out. She's really stressed about this party situation. I'm sure she is, I said evenly. Look, I get that money's tight for everyone right now. The real estate market has been brutal, trust me, I know. But this is Dad's 60th. It's a big deal. Can't you guys just put it on a credit card or something? I felt anger rising in my chest. Brandon, did they actually ask you to pay $2,000? Or did they tell you they did? There was a pause. What do you mean? I mean, are you actually paying your portion, or are Mom and Dad covering it for you? His silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said. Look, I'm not getting into this with you. My answer is no. If they want to pay your portion, that's their choice. But Ryan and I aren't contributing $4,000 to a party we had no say in planning. He scoffed. You know what your problem is? You've always thought you're better than us. You move to Portland, get your fancy job, live in your trendy neighborhood, and suddenly we're not good enough for you. This isn't about money. This is about you thinking you're too good for your own family. I hung up. I didn't yell, didn't argue, just disconnected the call and sat staring at my phone. Was that how they all saw me? That my independence was arrogance? That building a life for myself meant I thought I was superior? Ryan found me on the balcony an hour later, staring out at the city lights. He wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat beside me in silence for a while. I talked to Brandon, I finally said. They're not making him pay. They're paying his portion and making it seem like he's contributing so I look worse in comparison. Ryan nodded slowly. Of course they are. That's how they maintain the dynamic. Brandon's the one who needs protection and support. You're the one who's supposed to provide it. They've been doing this your whole life. I know, I whispered. I just keep thinking about all the times I let it happen. All the times I paid for things or did things or rearranged my life because they asked, and I never once questioned whether it was fair. You were conditioned not to question it, Ryan said gently. But you're questioning it now. That's what matters. Thursday brought a new tactic. My mother called from my father's phone, probably hoping I'd answer thinking it was him. I did, and immediately regretted it. Jessica, we need to talk about this situation. Your father's birthday is in 6 weeks, and we still don't have your contribution. The venue needs final payment, and we're short because you've decided to be difficult. I'm not being difficult, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I told you I can't contribute that amount. I'm still planning to attend and celebrate Dad, but I'm not paying $4,000. Then how much can you contribute? She asked. $4,000 is too much, what about 3? Or 2? We can work with you here, Jessica, but you have to meet us halfway. I felt the trap closing. This was the negotiation phase, where they'd make me feel like I was being reasonable by accepting a slightly smaller exploitation. Any amount I agreed to would still validate their belief that they could demand money from me. Mom, I'm not negotiating. The answer is no to any financial contribution. If you and Dad want this party, you'll need to fund it yourselves or scale it back to something you can afford. Her voice went cold. I see. So you're really going to do this? You're really going to humiliate your father by being the only family member who refuses to help. Brandon's not paying either, I pointed out. You're covering his portion. That's different. Brandon's struggling right now. The real estate market is down and he's having a hard time. You and Ryan have good incomes. You can afford this, you're just choosing not to. Exactly, I said. I'm choosing not to. That's my right. She hung up on me. That evening, I received an email from my Aunt Linda. Unlike the aggressive messages from my parents, hers was kind but concerned. Jess, I wanted to reach out privately. Your mother called me yesterday, quite upset. She's telling people you've cut off contact with the family and are refusing to attend your father's party out of spite. I assume there's more to the story. Call me when you can. I called her immediately, grateful for one sane voice in the chaos. Linda listened without interrupting as I explained everything. My birthday being ignored, The $4,000 demand, my refusal, the escalating guilt trips and manipulation. When I finished, she sighed deeply. Your mother is making this much worse than it needs to be, she said. I contributed what she asked because David and I can afford it and we didn't want the drama. But I want you to know I don't think any less of you for saying no. In fact, I think you're being remarkably mature about this. Setting financial boundaries is healthy, especially when the request is this unreasonable. She's telling people I'm refusing to attend the party, I said. That's not true. I just won't pay for it. I know, honey. I'll make sure people know the truth when it comes up. But you need to prepare yourself. Your mother has a way of controlling narratives, and she's very good at playing the victim. This might get uglier before it gets better. She was right. By Friday, I started receiving messages from family members I barely knew. A second cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years sent me a Facebook message about family loyalty. My father's former colleague, someone I'd met maybe twice in my life, emailed me about the importance of honoring your parents. Even my mother's hairdresser somehow got my number and called to tell me she'd heard about the situation and thought I should reconsider. It was orchestrated, calculated, a campaign designed to break me down through sheer volume of judgment. Every message had the same theme. Family comes first, you're being selfish, your parents deserve better. What kind of daughter refuses to help her father celebrate a milestone? I stopped responding to anyone except Taylor and Aunt Linda. I muted the family group chat. I let calls go to voicemail. But the psychological weight of it was crushing. I felt like I was walking around with a scarlet letter, marked as the bad daughter, the selfish one, the family failure. Ryan suggested I talk to a therapist. We'd been together for 4 years, and he'd watched this dynamic play out in smaller ways, but never with this intensity. He made an appointment for me with someone who specialized in family systems and trauma. I went the following Tuesday, skeptical that an hour of talking could fix 30 years of conditioning. Dr. Patricia Warren was in her 50s, with kind eyes and an office that smelled like lavender. She listened to my story without taking notes, just giving me her full attention. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. What you're describing is a pattern of emotional parentification and financial exploitation, she said gently. You were conditioned from a young age to prioritize your parents' and brothers' needs over your own. The fact that you're now setting a boundary, even a completely reasonable one, feels catastrophic because you've been trained to believe that your value lies in your compliance and sacrifice. I felt tears welling up. Is it really that bad? I mean, they're not hitting me or screaming at me. They're just disappointed. Emotional abuse doesn't have to be loud to be damaging, Dr. Warren said. The manipulation you're describing, the guilt trips, the mobilization of extended family to pressure you, the rewriting of history to paint you as the villain, these are all classic abuse tactics. They're designed to maintain control and ensure you stay in your assigned role within the family system. She gave me homework. Write down every instance I could remember of being treated differently than Brandon. Document the pattern. See it clearly. I spent that week filling pages in a notebook, and with each memory I recorded, the picture became clearer and more painful. The party was scheduled for December 15th, exactly 3 weeks before Christmas. As the date approached, the pressure intensified. My mother sent me the final guest list, a document with 137 names, as if seeing the scale of the event would make me reconsider. She included a note at the bottom. This is how many people care enough about your father to show up. I hope you'll be one of them. I confirmed my attendance 3 separate times, each time clarifying that Ryan and I would be there to celebrate but would not be contributing financially. Each confirmation was met with silence from my parents, which somehow felt worse than the angry messages had been. The silent treatment was its own form of punishment, a withdrawal of approval and acknowledgement that I'd experienced countless times throughout my childhood whenever I'd failed to meet their expectations. 2 weeks before the party, Brandon called again. This time his tone was different, less confrontational and more concerned. Jess, I need to tell you something, and you're probably going to be mad. I braced myself. Mom and Dad are planning something for the party. They're going to do this whole speech thing where they thank everyone who contributed to making the celebration possible. They're going to call people up to the front and present them with these commemorative frames or something. Your name isn't going to be called. My stomach dropped. They're going to publicly humiliate me in front of the entire family. I think that's the point, Brandon said quietly. Look, I know I've been on their side through this, but this feels too far. They're trying to punish you in front of everyone. I thought you should know so you're prepared. After we hung up, I sat with Ryan in our living room and told him. He was furious in a way I rarely saw from him. That's it, he said. We're not going. I'm not watching them shame you in front of 100 people. Absolutely not. Part of me wanted to agree, to skip the party entirely and avoid the humiliation. But another part of me, the part that had been growing stronger through therapy and boundary setting, refused to give them that satisfaction. If I didn't show up, it would only confirm their narrative that I was the problem, the difficult daughter who'd abandoned her family. If I went and held my head high while they tried to shame me, I'd be making a different statement entirely. I think we should go, I told Ryan. I think we should get dressed up, bring a nice gift, and show up like nothing's wrong. We'll stay for a reasonable amount of time, wish Dad a happy birthday, and leave. We won't give them the dramatic confrontation they're probably hoping for. Ryan studied my face. Are you sure? Because if they pull that stunt with the thank you speeches, I'm not going to be able to stay quiet. You won't have to, I said. We'll just leave. Calmly, quietly. We'll let their behavior speak for itself. The morning of December 15th was gray and cold, typical Oregon winter weather. I put on a burgundy dress I'd been saving, something elegant and expensive that I'd bought for myself as an early birthday present to replace the one my parents had ignored. Ryan wore a suit. We looked like we were going to a wedding, not a birthday party, but that felt appropriate somehow. We were dressing for battle, armor disguised as formal wear. The drive to Eugene felt longer than usual. We didn't talk much, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I kept rehearsing possible scenarios in my head, preparing responses to potential confrontations. Ryan held my hand across the center console, his presence steady and grounding. Willamette Valley Country Club was exactly the kind of venue my parents would choose, all old money elegance and understated luxury. The parking lot was already full when we arrived at 6:30, and I recognized cars belonging to various family members and family friends. We sat in the car for a moment, both of us gathering courage. Ready? Ryan asked. No, I admitted. But let's do it anyway. The ballroom was stunning, I had to give them that. String lights draped across the ceiling, elegant floral centerpieces on every table. A live jazz band setting up in the corner. A massive banner hung behind the head table. Happy 60th birthday, Bob. There were photos everywhere. A timeline of my father's life displayed on boards around the room. I scanned them quickly and noticed something that made my chest tight. There were plenty of photos of Brandon at various ages. Photos of my parents together, my father with colleagues and friends. But I appeared in exactly 3 photos, all from early childhood. And in 2 of them my face was partially obscured or turned away. It was as if I'd been systematically edited out of the family history. Jessica. Ryan. My Aunt Linda appeared at my elbow, pulling me into a warm hug. I'm so glad you came. You both look wonderful. She lowered her voice. Your mother's been in rare form tonight. Just warning you. We made our way through the room, greeting relatives and family friends. Most people were warm and welcoming, either unaware of the drama or choosing to ignore it. A few gave me pointed looks or cold shoulders, clearly having heard my mother's version of events. I kept my head high and my smile pleasant, refusing to show any discomfort. My parents were holding court near the front of the room, surrounded by guests offering congratulations and well wishes. My mother saw me first, and her expression flickered with surprise before settling into something hard and cold. She whispered something to my father, who turned and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I approached with Ryan at my side, carrying the gift we'd brought, a leather-bound journal and an expensive bottle of scotch. Dad, happy birthday, I said, offering a genuine smile. We're so glad to celebrate with you. My father accepted the gift with a stiff nod. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Of course I came, I said evenly. You're my father. My mother stepped forward, her voice syrupy sweet but her eyes sharp. Jessica, darling. We saved you seats at table 12. It's toward the back, but I'm sure you'll be comfortable there. Table 12, I would discover, was as far from the head table as physically possible, tucked in a corner near the kitchen doors. The message was clear, but I simply thanked her and made my way to the assigned table with Ryan. We were seated with people I didn't know, friends of my parents who introduced themselves politely but distantly. Dinner was catered perfectly, multiple courses served with practiced efficiency. The jazz band played soft standards. People mingled between courses, the room filled with laughter and conversation. On the surface, it was a lovely party. But I felt like I was watching it all from behind glass, present but separate, included but marked as other. After dessert was served, my father stood and tapped his glass for attention. The room quieted as he moved to the microphone the band had been using. He began with a speech about gratitude and family, about the importance of the people who stand beside you through life. He thanked my mother for being his partner, his rock. He thanked his colleagues for years of friendship and professional support. He thanked the country club staff for making the evening special. Then he said, I also want to take a moment to recognize and thank the family members who made this celebration possible through their generous contributions. Planning an event of this magnitude requires not just time and effort, but significant financial investment, and I'm blessed to have family members who stepped up to make it happen. My hands clenched in my lap under the table. Ryan's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. My father began calling names. Brandon Palmer, my son, thank you for your generosity and support. Brandon stood, looking uncomfortable as people applauded, and walked to the front where my father handed him a framed photo and embraced him. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of maternal pride. He called Linda and David. He called two of my cousins. He called family friends I barely knew. Each person walked to the front, received their frame and their moment of recognition, while the room applauded. The message was clear and public. These were the good family members, the ones who'd contributed, who'd done their duty. My name was never called. I sat perfectly still, my face composed, while the symbolic rejection played out in front of everyone. I could feel eyes on me, some sympathetic, some judgmental, some simply curious. Ryan's jaw was clenched so tight I worried he might crack a tooth. Under the table, his hand gripped mine almost painfully. When my father finished his recognition speech and returned to his seat, the room buzzed with renewed conversation. I stood carefully, smoothing my dress. Ryan stood with me, his expression thunderous. We're leaving, he said quietly. We made our way toward the exit, moving through the crowd as invisibly as possible. But my mother intercepted us near the door. Leaving so soon? The party's just getting started. I looked at her directly, seeing her clearly, perhaps for the first time in my life. Not the idealized mother I'd wanted her to be, but the person she actually was. Someone who needed control more than she needed connection. Someone who saw her children not as individuals to be loved, but as players in a hierarchy to be managed. It was a lovely party, Mom, I said calmly. I'm glad we could be here to celebrate Dad. But Ryan and I need to get back to Portland. Her smile was brittle. Of course. I'm sure you have very important things to do. More important than family. I could have argued. I could have defended myself, listed all the ways I'd tried to be a good daughter, all the times I'd shown up only to be dismissed. But I'd learned something through therapy and through this entire painful process. You can't win an argument with someone who's committed to misunderstanding you. You can only choose whether to keep playing the game. Take care of yourself, Mom, I said, and I meant it. Not as a blessing but as a recognition that her well-being was not my responsibility. Ryan and I walked out into the cold December night, leaving the party behind. Neither of us spoke until we were in the car with the doors closed. Then Ryan let out a long breath. That was one of the hardest things I've ever watched. I'm so sorry, Jess. Don't be, I said, and I was surprised to find I meant it. I'm not. They showed everyone exactly who they are tonight. I don't have to wonder anymore if I'm the problem or if I'm being too sensitive or if I should try harder. They made it crystal clear. We drove back to Portland in the dark, and I felt something shifting inside me. Not happiness exactly, but a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in months. The weight of their expectations, their disappointment, their manipulation, it was still there, but it no longer felt like mine to carry. The next morning, I woke to an email from my father. Brief and cold. Your absence from the thank you ceremony was noted by many guests last night. Your mother is embarrassed and hurt. I hope you're satisfied with the statement you made. I read it once, then deleted it without responding. Over the following weeks, I received a few more messages from family members. Some were critical, echoing my parents' narrative that I'd been disrespectful and ungrateful. But others were surprising. 2 cousins reached out privately to say they'd found the public thank you ceremony uncomfortable and manipulative. Aunt Linda called to check on me and admitted she wished she'd walked out with me. Even one of my father's friends sent a thoughtful email saying he'd watched the dynamic at the party and felt my parents had been unnecessarily harsh. The family gossip eventually died down, as gossip always does. My parents stopped contacting me entirely, which hurt less than I expected. Brandon called once, awkwardly trying to play mediator, but I told him I wasn't interested in repairing a relationship that had never been healthy to begin with. Ryan and I spent Christmas quietly in Portland, just the 2 of us and Taylor and a few close friends. We cooked too much food, watched terrible holiday movies, and I didn't feel guilty once for not being in Eugene. Dr. Warren helped me understand that the grief I felt wasn't for the family I was losing, but for the family I'd never actually had, the idealized version I'd been chasing my entire life. In January, Ryan and I started seriously house hunting. Without the $4,000 gone to my parents' party, our savings were exactly where we'd planned them to be. We found a small craftsman in southeast Portland with a yard big enough for the garden I'd always wanted. When we signed the papers in March, I felt proud in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. My 30th year had started with silence and dismissal, but it ended with clarity and boundaries and the beginning of something built entirely on my own terms. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you need. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is stop trying to earn affection from people who've shown you they're incapable of giving it freely. And sometimes peace doesn't come from reconciliation. It comes from acceptance that some relationships cost more than they're worth, and walking away isn't giving up. It's finally choosing yourself. Spring came to Portland with cherry blossoms and unexpected rain, the kind that washes everything clean. Ryan and I moved into our craftsman house on a Saturday in late March, surrounded by friends who showed up with pizza and questionable lifting techniques. Taylor commandeered the kitchen unpacking, while Ryan's college roommate attempted to assemble furniture with instructions he refused to read. It was chaotic and perfect, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely happy without that underlying current of anxiety that had become so familiar. The house needed work, cosmetic things mostly. The kitchen cabinets were dated, the bathroom fixtures were brass when everything had moved to brushed nickel, and the backyard was more weeds than grass. But it was ours, purchased with money we'd saved through our own discipline and planning. Every morning I woke up in that house, I felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. My parents didn't know we'd bought a house. I hadn't told them and they hadn't asked. The silence between us had stretched from weeks into months, and I'd stopped waiting for it to break. Dr. Warren had warned me about this, the extinction burst she called it, the period where the people you've set boundaries with either escalate dramatically to regain control or disappear entirely to punish you with absence. My parents had chosen the latter. Brandon reached out occasionally with awkward text messages that felt obligatory rather than genuine. "Hey sis, hope you're doing okay. Things are good here. Talk soon." I'd respond with equal brevity, maintaining civility without encouraging deeper connection. The brother I'd grown up with felt like a stranger now, and I'd accepted that maybe he always had been. We'd been raised in the same house but in fundamentally different families. In April, I got a promotion at work. Senior Product Manager. A title I'd been working toward for 3 years. It came with a significant raise and the kind of projects I'd been wanting to lead. I celebrated with Ryan and Taylor and my Portland friends, people who'd shown up for me consistently without requiring constant sacrifice in return. I posted about it on social media, a rare personal update, and watched as friends and colleagues congratulated me. My parents didn't comment or like the post. Neither did Brandon. But Aunt Linda did, with a comment that said, "So proud of you, honey. You've always been destined for great things." That single comment meant more than a dozen from my parents ever had. May brought my first Mother's Day of not feeling obligated to perform gratitude. Previous years, I'd driven to Eugene, brought expensive gifts, taken my mother to brunch at places she chose. This year I sent a card, brief and polite, and spent the day working in my garden. I planted tomatoes and herbs, flowers that would bloom in summer. My hands in the soil felt meditative, grounding in a way that family obligation never had. My mother didn't acknowledge the card. Part of me had hoped for something, some crack in the wall of silence, but her lack of response was its own answer. She was committed to the punishment, to making me feel the weight of her disapproval until I caved and apologized for having boundaries. But I'd learned something important over these months. Her disapproval only had power if I needed her approval, and I was learning to live without it. In June, something unexpected happened. I ran into one of my father's former colleagues at a coffee shop in Portland. Martin Chan, a man who'd worked with my dad for over 20 years, someone I remembered from childhood birthday parties and company picnics. He recognized me immediately and asked to join me at my table. "Jessica, it's wonderful to see you," he said warmly. "How have you been? I heard about the situation with your father's party. I wanted to reach out but wasn't sure if it was appropriate." "I'm doing well, actually," I said carefully, unsure where this conversation was heading. Martin stirred his coffee, choosing his words carefully. "I've known your parents for a long time. Your father and I worked together for 18 years before he retired. And I've watched how they treat you versus how they treat Brandon. It's been troubling for a long time, if I'm being honest." I felt something loosen in my chest. "You noticed?" "Everyone noticed," he said gently. "At least those of us paying attention. The way they dismissed your accomplishments while celebrating Brandon's mediocrity. The way you were expected to be self-sufficient while he was coddled. At the party in December, when your father did that recognition ceremony and deliberately excluded you, my wife and I almost left. It was cruel and petty, and you didn't deserve it." Hearing validation from someone outside my immediate circle, someone who'd known my family for decades, felt like being given permission to trust my own reality. "I'm learning to be okay with it," I told him. "I'm building a life that doesn't require their approval." "Good," Martin said firmly. "You deserve better than what they've given you. Your father used to brag about you at work, you know, when you graduated college, when you got your first management position. But he'd always add these qualifiers, like he couldn't just be proud without diminishing it somehow. He'd say things like, well, she's always been the ambitious one, or she gets that drive from her mother's side. Like he couldn't fully claim you as his success story. We talked for another hour. Martin sharing observations from years of knowing my family. He told me about times my father had left work events early to attend Brandon's mediocre baseball games but missed company celebrations I'd been specifically invited to. He mentioned my mother calling the office once, distraught because Brandon had failed a real estate exam, demanding my father come home immediately, but showing no similar urgency when I'd been in a minor car accident during college. The conversation was painful but validating. My reality wasn't distorted or exaggerated. The favoritism I'd experienced was real and observable to others. I wasn't being sensitive or unfair. I was finally seeing clearly. July marked my 31st birthday. This year I planned nothing, expected nothing, and felt no disappointment when my parents remained silent. Ryan took me to the coast for the weekend, back to Cannon Beach where we'd weathered the initial storm of family drama. We walked on the sand at sunset, and I realized I'd spent an entire year learning to exist without my family's approval, and I'd survived it. More than survived, I'd thrived. On a warm evening in August, almost a year after my 30th birthday had been ignored, I received an unexpected email. It was from my mother, the first direct communication in months. The subject line read, "Family Update." My hands shook slightly as I opened it, that old conditioned response to her reaching out. But the email wasn't an apology or an attempt at reconciliation. It was an announcement sent to what I assumed was a mass family email list. Brandon was engaged. He'd been dating someone named Melissa for 5 months, and they decided to get married in October. The wedding would be at the same country club where my father's party had been held. And then, buried in the third paragraph, almost as an afterthought, "We know there's been distance in the family lately, but we hope everyone can put aside differences to celebrate this happy occasion." Put aside differences was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. It assumed the problem was a mutual disagreement rather than their pattern of mistreatment, and my decision to stop accepting it. It positioned me as equally responsible for the estrangement, erasing their role entirely. Ryan read the email over my shoulder. "Are you going to go?" "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to be the bigger person, to show up and prove I'm not vindictive or petty. But another part of me knows that going would signal I'm willing to accept their treatment, that silence and manipulation can be overcome by simply pretending nothing happened. "What do you want to do?" Ryan asked. "Not what you think you should do. What do you actually want?" I thought about it carefully, sitting with the question. I don't want to go, I finally said. I don't want to get dressed up and drive to Eugene and smile through another event where I'm tolerated but not welcomed. I don't want to watch my parents celebrate Brandon while treating me like a problem that's been temporarily solved by my presence. I don't want to pretend we're a functional family when we're not. Then don't go, Ryan said simply. Send a gift if you want to be gracious. But you don't owe them your presence. I drafted a response that evening, revised it a dozen times over the next few days. Finally, I settled on something brief and clear. Congratulations to Brandon and Melissa. I wish them happiness. Ryan and I won't be able to attend the wedding, but we'll send a gift. Best wishes to everyone. My mother's response came within an hour. I see you're still punishing this family for perceived slights. Your brother is getting married, Jessica. This is important. But if you choose to miss it out of spite, that's on you. Don't expect us to keep reaching out when you've made it clear where your priorities lie. I read it once and didn't respond. Her words had lost their power to wound me. She could frame my boundaries as punishment, my self-protection as spite, but that was her narrative to maintain, not mine to correct. Brandon called a few days later. I answered, curious what he'd say. Jess, Mom said you're not coming to the wedding. Is that true? It's true, I confirmed. I'm sending a gift and my best wishes, but I won't be attending. There was a long pause. Because you're still mad about Dad's party? I'm not mad, Brandon. I'm just done participating in family dynamics that hurt me. I've set boundaries and they've been disrespected repeatedly. So I'm choosing not to put myself in situations where that continues. You've always been dramatic, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. You take everything so personally. Not everything is about you, Jess. You're right, I said calmly. Not everything is about me. In fact, very little has ever been about me in this family. That's exactly why I'm making different choices now. He hung up without saying goodbye. I felt sad but not guilty. Sad for the sibling relationship we could have had if the dynamics had been different, but not guilty for refusing to keep sacrificing myself to maintain an illusion of family harmony. September and October passed quietly. I heard through Aunt Linda that Brandon's wedding was lovely, well attended, another successful event at the country club. My parents apparently made a speech about how proud they were of him, how he'd found his perfect partner, how excited they were about the future. I felt nothing hearing it. No jealousy or resentment, just a distant acknowledgement that they were who they'd always been. In November, a year after the initial demand for party money, I received a letter in the mail. Not an email but an actual physical letter. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten, my mother's familiar script filling the pages. It started with pleasantries, mentions of weather and holidays approaching. Then it shifted. She wrote about how difficult the past year had been, how painful it was to be estranged from a daughter. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of reflection. She acknowledged, finally, that perhaps she'd been too harsh about the party contribution. Perhaps she'd mishandled things. But then came the qualifiers. However, you must understand how hurtful your rejection was. However, you could have communicated better. However, Brandon has always needed more support, and it's unfair of you to resent that. The apology, if it could even be called that, was buried under justifications and blame shifting. She ended the letter with, I hope we can move past this and rebuild our relationship. Family is everything, Jessica. Don't throw it away over money. I read the letter twice, analyzing each sentence with the clarity I'd developed through therapy. This wasn't real accountability. This was love bombing. An attempt to pull me back in now that exclusion hadn't worked. The relationship she wanted to rebuild was the one where I accepted poor treatment without complaint. The moving past she proposed meant me forgetting without them changing. I didn't respond to the letter. Silence felt like the most honest answer. As the year anniversary of my ignored birthday approached, I found myself taking stock of everything that had changed. I'd bought a house, earned a promotion, cultivated deeper friendships with people who showed up consistently. I'd learned to trust my own reality even when others tried to rewrite it. I discovered that being alone was better than being with people who made me feel alone. My relationship with Ryan had deepened through the crisis. He'd seen me at my most vulnerable and hadn't flinched. We'd talked about getting engaged, about building our future with intention and care. When he eventually proposed on a rainy December evening in our living room, surrounded by boxes we still hadn't unpacked and paint samples we couldn't decide between, it felt perfect. Not because it was elaborate or Instagram-worthy, but because it was honest and built on mutual respect. I didn't call my parents to tell them about the engagement. I posted it on social media. A simple announcement with a photo of Ryan and me laughing, my hand showing a modest ring he'd chosen with such care. Friends and colleagues flooded the post with congratulations. Aunt Linda called immediately, crying happy tears. Even Martin Chan, my father's former colleague, commented with warm wishes. My parents didn't acknowledge it at all. Neither did Brandon. Their silence was its own statement, a final confirmation that if I wouldn't play by their rules, I wouldn't be acknowledged at all. And I found I was okay with that. More than okay. Relieved. Planning my wedding was entirely different from everything I'd experienced with my 30th birthday. Ryan and I chose a small venue in the Columbia River Gorge, invited only people who'd consistently shown they cared about us. 70 guests, intimate and intentional. No family drama because we simply didn't invite the drama. We sent announcements to my parents and Brandon, informing them of the wedding but not extending invitations. Let them make of that what they would. The wedding day in June was perfect. Sunny and warm, the gorge spread out behind us like a painting. I walked down the aisle alone, not given away by anyone because I'd never belonged to anyone to give. Taylor stood beside me as maid of honor. Ryan's best friend stood beside him. We said vows we'd written ourselves, promises based on respect and partnership in choosing each other every day. After the ceremony, during the reception, I looked around at the faces of our guests. Every single person there had earned their place by showing up for us, not just on this day but consistently over time. There were no empty seats representing obligation or duty. There was no family member demanding attention or creating drama. There was just love, uncomplicated and freely given. Aunt Linda cornered me during dinner, tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "Not just for this beautiful wedding, but for everything you've done this past year. Walking away from toxicity, building your own life, refusing to accept less than you deserve. You've been braver than most people ever are." I hugged her tightly, grateful for the one family member who'd consistently seen me clearly. Her presence felt like a bridge to the good parts of my history, proof that blood relation didn't have to mean toxic obligation. That night, as Ryan and I drove to the small bed and breakfast where we'd spend our first night as a married couple, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the wedding ceremony. The past 2 years had been a long, painful process of unlearning patterns and setting boundaries and choosing myself even when it felt selfish. I'd lost my parents and brother in the process, but I'd gained something more valuable. Self-respect. Peace. The knowledge that I deserved better than what I'd been accepting my entire life. My phone buzzed with a text as we pulled into the bed and breakfast parking lot. For a brief moment I hoped irrationally that it might be my mother, that she'd somehow heard about the wedding and reached out. But it was Taylor, sending a photo from the reception. Ryan and me laughing at something. Pure joy on both our faces. The caption read, "This is what happy looks like. So proud of you both." I saved the photo and turned off my phone. Whatever my parents were doing tonight, whatever they thought about my wedding they hadn't been invited to, it didn't matter anymore. Their approval or disapproval, their presence or absence, it had stopped being the measure of my worth. I'd spent 30 years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it freely. I'd spent the last 2 years learning to give it to myself instead. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stop trying to fix what was never yours to fix. Sometimes peace doesn't come from reconciliation but from acceptance. And sometimes the family you build is more real than the family you're born into. I'd finally learned that love isn't supposed to cost everything. It's supposed to add to your life, not subtract from it. And any relationship that requires you to shrink yourself to fit isn't worth keeping, no matter what biology says about it. The honeymoon was a week in a cabin outside Bend, Oregon, surrounded by ponderosa pines and the kind of quiet that only exists when you're far from everything familiar. Ryan and I hiked during the day, cooked simple meals in the evenings, and spent our nights talking about the future we were building together. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't carrying the weight of family expectations or the anxiety of waiting for the next emotional manipulation. I was just present, just myself, just happy. On our 4th day there, While Ryan was out fishing at a nearby lake, I found myself sitting on the cabin's small porch with my journal, something Dr. Warren had encouraged me to keep. I'd been documenting my journey for over a year now, tracking patterns and processing feelings, and I decided to write a letter I'd never send. A letter to my parents, not for them but for me, to articulate everything I'd never been able to say directly. I wrote about being 7 years old and winning the school spelling bee, coming home so excited to share the news, only to have my mother barely glance up from helping Brandon with homework he'd refused to start until the last minute. I wrote about my high school graduation where I'd been valedictorian, and how my parents had left the ceremony early because Brandon had a baseball game. I wrote about every birthday that had been forgotten or minimized, every achievement that had been met with lukewarm acknowledgement, every time I'd been told I was being too sensitive or too demanding when I'd asked for even a fraction of the attention they gave Brandon. I wrote about the party, about standing in that country club ballroom watching my father thank everyone except me, about the calculated cruelty of that public rejection. I wrote about the $4,000 demand, about how they'd valued their celebration over my financial security, about how they'd mobilized family members to pressure and guilt me. I wrote about every text message and email and phone call that had prioritized their wants over my well-being. But I also wrote about what I'd learned, that their inability to love me the way I needed wasn't a reflection of my worth, but of their limitations. That Brandon being the favorite wasn't about him being more deserving, but about them needing someone to remain dependent so they could feel needed. That my independence and success threatened the family dynamic because it proved you could thrive without their approval. I wrote about recognizing the patterns, naming them, refusing to participate in them anymore. When Ryan returned hours later with 3 trout he'd caught, he found me still on the porch, pages of writing scattered around me. He sat down beside me without speaking, just his presence a quiet support. Finally, I looked up at him. "I think I'm really done," I said. "Not angry done or hurt done. Just actually done. I don't think I want them in my life anymore, even if they somehow managed a real apology." He nodded slowly. "How does that feel?" "Like relief," I admitted. "Like I've been carrying a 100-pound weight for 30 years and I finally just set it down. I kept thinking maybe they'd change, maybe something would shift, but they've shown me who they are over and over. I believe them now." We spent the rest of the honeymoon talking through what that would look like practically. Did I want to send a final letter explaining my decision? Did I want to block their numbers and emails? Did I want to maintain any connection through Aunt Linda, or should I make a complete break? These weren't easy questions and I didn't have immediate answers, but it felt important to consider them deliberately rather than just drifting into estrangement by default. When we returned to Portland in late June, I felt both lighter and more grounded than I had in years. Our house had become home in our absence, plants thriving because Taylor had watered them, mail piled up but nothing urgent. Ryan went back to his architecture firm, I returned to my product management role, and we settled into married life with the quiet satisfaction of having built something solid. In July I made a decision. I drafted a final letter to my parents, not the emotional outpouring I'd written in the cabin but something clear and boundaried. I worked on it with Dr. Warren over 2 sessions, refining the language to be direct without being cruel, honest without leaving room for misinterpretation. The letter read, "Mom and Dad, I'm writing to let you know that I've decided to step back from our relationship indefinitely. This isn't a decision I've made lightly or impulsively. It's the result of years of feeling unseen, undervalued, and treated as less important than Brandon. The situation with my 30th birthday and Dad's party was not an isolated incident, but rather a clear example of patterns that have existed throughout my life. I've spent considerable time in therapy working through these dynamics, and I've realized that continuing to pursue a relationship with you is harmful to my mental health and well-being. I need you to know that this is not about punishment or vindictiveness. It's about self-preservation and choosing relationships that are reciprocal and healthy. I'm not interested in debating this decision or hearing justifications for past behavior. I'm simply informing you of my boundary. I wish you both well, but I won't be maintaining contact going forward. Please respect this decision by not attempting to reach out through other family members or showing up at my home. Jessica." I mailed it on a Tuesday morning, certified mail, so I'd know they received it. Then I blocked their numbers and email addresses. Not out of anger but out of practicality. I told Aunt Linda about my decision during a lunch meeting, wanting her to hear it from me directly. She was sad but understanding, promising to respect my boundary and not serve as a go-between. The response came anyway, filtered through Brandon, who somehow got my work email address. His message was predictably defensive and accusatory. "Jess, I can't believe you're doing this to our parents. After everything they've done for you, you're just cutting them off because they didn't give you enough attention? That's incredibly selfish and immature. Mom is devastated. Dad won't even talk about it. You're tearing this family apart over nothing. I hope you realize what you're throwing away before it's too late." I forwarded the email to Dr. Warren without responding to Brandon, and we discussed it in our next session. The language he used was revealing. Everything they'd done for me, as if basic parenting was a debt I owed. Not enough attention, minimizing decades of differential treatment. Tearing the family apart, making me responsible for their emotional reactions. The email was a perfect encapsulation of why distance was necessary. I didn't respond to Brandon. Instead, I blocked his email addresses too. If he wanted to be their messenger, he could do it into the void. I'd spent enough years trying to explain myself to people who were determined to misunderstand me. August brought unexpected developments. Aunt Linda called one evening, her voice troubled. "Honey, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. Your mother has been telling people at her church that you've abandoned the family because you met a man who turned you against them. She's painting Ryan as the villain who manipulated you into cutting off your loving parents. I thought you should know in case it gets back to you somehow." I thanked her for the information and felt remarkably little emotion about it. Of course my mother was rewriting the narrative. Of course she couldn't accept responsibility for the estrangement. It was easier to blame Ryan, to create a story where she was the victim of external manipulation rather than the architect of her own consequences. I'd expected it. Honestly, the only surprise was how quickly she'd mobilized the campaign. Ryan was furious when I told him, "We should send that letter you wrote to everyone she's been talking to. Set the record straight. Show them the emails and text. Prove what actually happened." But I shook my head. It won't matter. People who want to believe her will believe her regardless of evidence. And honestly, I don't need to defend myself to people who are willing to accept her version without ever asking mine. Let her tell whatever story she needs to tell. I know the truth. You know the truth. The people who actually matter to us know the truth. That's enough. In September, I got promoted again at work. Director of Product Management, a role I'd been working toward for 5 years. It came with a substantial raise, a team to lead, and the kind of professional recognition I dreamed about. I celebrated with my work colleagues, with Ryan and Taylor, with the chosen family I'd built in Portland. I posted about it on social media with genuine pride. The post got hundreds of likes and comments from friends and colleagues. Aunt Linda commented with multiple celebration emojis. Martin Chan, my father's former colleague who I'd stayed in occasional contact with, wrote a thoughtful congratulations about how I'd earned this through talent and hard work. But there was nothing from my parents or Brandon, not that I'd expected anything. Their silence used to hurt. Now it was just confirmation that I'd made the right choice. In October, something happened that tested my resolve in a way I hadn't anticipated. Aunt Linda called late on a Thursday evening, and I knew before I answered that something was wrong. Her voice was tight with worry. "Jess, I'm calling because I think you have a right to know. Your father had a heart attack this afternoon. He's in the hospital in Eugene. He's stable now, but it was serious. Your mother is asking for you." My stomach dropped. The old conditioning kicked in immediately. This is my father. He's in the hospital. I should go. Family emergency trumps all boundaries. But I forced myself to pause, to sit with the feeling rather than react to it. Ryan appeared in the doorway of our home office, seeing my expression, silently asking if I was okay. "How serious is it?" I asked Linda. "Serious but not life-threatening now. They did an angioplasty. He'll need some lifestyle changes and medication, but the doctors expect a full recovery. Your mother is being dramatic about it, but he's not dying, honey." I took a breath. "Linda, I appreciate you telling me, but I'm not going to the hospital. I made a decision about this relationship, and a medical emergency doesn't change the reasons for that decision." There was a long pause. She said quietly, "I understand. I think that's probably wise, actually. Your mother will use this to try to manipulate you back into the family, and that's not fair to you. But I wanted you to have the information so you could make your own choice. After we hung up, Ryan sat beside me on the couch. Talk to me, he said. I feel guilty, I admitted. Like maybe I should go. Maybe this is different. But then I remember why I set the boundary in the first place, and I know that showing up at the hospital doesn't fix any of that. It just teaches them that medical emergencies are the leverage point to get me back. What do you want to do? I want to send flowers and a card. I want to acknowledge that I heard about it and I hope he recovers. But I don't want to go there and open myself up to their manipulation again. Is that terrible? Am I a terrible person? Ryan pulled me close. You're not terrible. You're protecting yourself. There's a difference between being cruel and having boundaries. Your father will recover just fine without you there. And if your mother tries to use this to guilt you, that just proves why you needed distance in the first place. I sent a flower arrangement to the hospital the next day with a card that read, Dad, I heard about your heart attack. I'm glad you're recovering. Wishing you good health. Jessica. Simple, appropriate, boundaried. I didn't call. I didn't visit. I didn't let crisis override the decision I'd made carefully and deliberately. Brandon sent me an angry text that somehow got through, probably from a new number I hadn't blocked. Dad almost died and you can't even bother to show up. What kind of person are you? Mom was right about you all along. You're selfish and cold and you don't deserve to be part of this family. I blocked the new number and showed the text to Dr. Warren in our next session. She pointed out the manipulation tactics at play. The exaggeration of severity, the accusation of selfishness, the suggestion that I didn't deserve family connection. All of it designed to make me feel guilty enough to compromise my boundaries. We talked about how medical emergencies often become leverage points in toxic family systems, how the crisis creates pressure to forget patterns and focus on the immediate situation. But I held firm. I didn't visit the hospital. I didn't call to check in. I maintained the boundary I'd set, and it was hard but necessary. My father recovered, just as the doctors had predicted. He was home within a week, posting on social media about being grateful for second chances and the support of his loving family, with photos of my mother and Brandon at his bedside. I wasn't in any of the photos and I was fine with that. November arrived with early snow, unusual for Portland. Ryan and I spent Thanksgiving with Taylor and a group of friends, a potluck where everyone brought dishes and we ate too much and played board games that got competitive. It was warm and genuine and free of obligation. I thought briefly about past Thanksgivings at Aunt Tessa's house in Eugene, the tension and performance and careful navigation of my parents' moods. This was better. This was real. December brought the 2-year anniversary of my father's 60th birthday party, the event that had catalyzed everything. I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in those 2 years. I'd gone from someone who would have paid the $4,000 while resenting it to someone who could set a clear boundary and maintain it through pressure and guilt and even medical emergency. I'd gone from constantly seeking my parents' approval to not needing it at all. I'd gone from believing family obligation was sacred to understanding that some relationships aren't worth preserving. Dr. Warren and I talked about terminating therapy, not because anything was wrong but because I'd done the work I needed to do. I'd processed the childhood trauma, identified the patterns, learned to set boundaries, grieved the family I'd never really had. I still had healing to do, but I had the tools now. We agreed to move to monthly check-ins rather than weekly sessions, a graduation of sorts. In January, 2 years after my parents had ignored my 30th birthday, I turned 32. Ryan organized a surprise dinner with our closest friends at a restaurant I loved. Taylor gave a toast about growth and courage in choosing yourself. Aunt Linda video called to sing happy birthday. It was simple and perfect and everything a birthday should be. My parents didn't acknowledge it, just like they hadn't acknowledged my 31st. But this time I didn't feel disappointed or hurt. I just felt grateful for the people who did show up. February brought news through Aunt Linda that Brandon and Melissa were expecting a baby. My parents were apparently over the moon, already buying nursery furniture and planning to be very involved grandparents. I felt nothing hearing this news, no jealousy or resentment, just a distant acknowledgement of information about people I used to know. Linda asked gently if I wanted to send a congratulations card, and I considered it but ultimately decided against it. That would signal an opening I didn't want to create. Ryan and I had started talking seriously about having children ourselves. It brought up complicated feelings about family and cycles and what kind of parents we wanted to be. I worried about passing on trauma, about unconsciously repeating patterns, about being unable to love my children equally if we had more than one. Dr. Warren assured me that awareness was half the battle, that recognizing the patterns meant I could actively choose differently. In March, something unexpected happened. I received a letter from my father, not my mother. It arrived at my house, meaning he'd somehow gotten my address, probably through Linda, though she denied it. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I opened it, Ryan offering to read it first if I wanted a buffer. When I finally read it, I was surprised by the content. The letter was shorter than my mother's had been, less manipulative in tone. He wrote that his heart attack had made him think about mortality and legacy and relationships. He acknowledged in careful language that he'd perhaps not been as attentive to me as he should have been over the years. He said he recognized now that Brandon had required more support, but that maybe they'd gone too far in that direction. He said he missed me and hoped we could find a way to reconnect. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from him, but it was still full of qualifiers and passive voice. Perhaps not as attentive rather than I neglected your emotional needs. Maybe gone too far rather than I treated you as less important. Required more support rather than we coddled him at your expense. The letter was progress maybe, but it wasn't real accountability. I showed it to Ryan and to Dr. Warren. Both had similar reactions. It was better than nothing, but not enough to rebuild a relationship on. Ryan asked what I wanted to do, and I realized I didn't know. Part of me wanted to respond, to acknowledge the gesture, to leave a door slightly open. But another part of me remembered all the times I'd accepted crumbs and called it a meal. All the times I'd let partial apologies serve as permission to go back to harmful patterns. I ultimately decided to respond briefly. Dad, I received your letter. I appreciate you taking the time to write, and to acknowledge some of what happened between us. I'm glad you're recovering and that the heart attack prompted reflection. However, I'm not ready to reconnect. I need more time and space to continue my own healing. I hope you can respect that. Take care of yourself. Jessica. His response came within days. I understand, though I'm disappointed. The door will always be open on our end when you're ready to come back to the family. I noticed he'd said when, not if. Still assuming I'd eventually return, still not really hearing what I was saying. But at least he was trying, which was more than my mother had done. Spring arrived again, bringing a full year since my wedding that my parents hadn't attended. Ryan and I celebrated our first anniversary with a weekend in wine country, staying at a bed and breakfast and visiting small vineyards. We talked about the future, about maybe starting to try for a baby, about the life we were building together brick by brick. In May, Aunt Linda called with news that surprised me. Your mother and I had a falling out, she said. I finally told her I thought she'd treated you terribly, and that I didn't want to hear any more complaints about you. She didn't take it well. We're not speaking right now. I felt guilty immediately. Linda, I never wanted to cause problems between you and your sister. You didn't cause this, honey. I caused it by finally standing up to her. I've watched her treat you like a second-class family member for 30 years, and I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. We talked for over an hour, Linda sharing observations from throughout my childhood that she'd never voiced before. Times she'd wanted to intervene but hadn't, believing it wasn't her place. Times she tried to give me extra attention to compensate for what I wasn't getting from my parents. Times she'd argued with my mother privately about the differential treatment. Hearing it all laid out, the full picture of what had been visible to others, was both validating and painful. In June, 2 years after my wedding, Ryan and I found out I was pregnant. We'd been trying for 3 months, so it wasn't unexpected, but it still felt momentous. We told Taylor and a few close friends, deciding to wait until after the first trimester to share more broadly. I felt joy but also fear, worried about what kind of mother I'd be with the example I'd had. Dr. Warren helped me work through those fears in our monthly sessions. We talked about breaking cycles, about the fact that my awareness of the problems meant I was already different from my parents. We talked about how my relationship with Ryan, built on respect and equality and mutual support, was the foundation our children would see and learn from. We talked about how I could choose differently at every turn. I didn't tell my parents about the pregnancy. Part of me wondered if I should. If becoming a grandparent might somehow soften my mother, or if denying them that information was cruel. But I talked it through with Ryan and decided that pregnancy didn't erase the reasons for our estrangement. If anything, it reinforced them. I didn't want my children exposed to the same dynamics I'd grown up with. I didn't want them to watch their grandmother favor one cousin over another, to internalize that conditional love was normal. In July, Linda accidentally let it slip to my mother that I was pregnant. She called immediately to apologize, worried she'd violated my trust. I assured her it was okay, that my mother would have found out eventually anyway. Sure enough, my mother attempted to reach out within hours, leaving a voicemail on my work number that somehow she'd gotten. "Jessica, it's your mother. I heard the wonderful news. I'm so happy for you and Ryan. I hope we can put this distance behind us now. Every child deserves to know their grandparents, and I'd hate for you to deprive your baby of family because of whatever hurt feelings you're carrying. Please call me so we can work this out." The manipulation was immediate and obvious, framing my boundaries as hurt feelings rather than responses to behavior, using my unborn child as leverage to try to force reconciliation, suggesting I'd be depriving my baby rather than protecting them. I didn't return the call. I didn't engage with the narrative she was trying to create. Brandon called too, leaving a message that was less manipulative but still presumptuous. "Hey Jess, heard you're pregnant. Congrats. Melissa and I are expecting number 2 now. Would be cool for the kids to know each other. Maybe this is a good time to let the past be the past. Give me a call." I didn't call him either. The assumption that pregnancy would automatically heal wounds, that becoming parents would create common ground sufficient to override years of mistreatment, felt insulting. I'd worked too hard on my healing to compromise it for the sake of children knowing relatives who would likely continue the same harmful patterns. August brought a new tactic. My mother sent a package to our house, addressed to baby Palmer, even though I'd never told her our due date or confirmed the pregnancy. Inside was a hand-knitted baby blanket, clearly made with care, and a card that read, "For my first grandbaby from Grandma Karen. I can't wait to meet you." The emotional manipulation was sophisticated, claiming first grandbaby status when Brandon's child would be born before mine, identifying herself as grandma when she hadn't earned that relationship, using a beautiful handmade gift as a guilt delivery system. Ryan wanted to return it immediately, but I had a different idea. I donated the blanket to a women's shelter, along with a monetary donation in honor of baby Palmer. Then I sent my mother a brief email. "Received your package. The blanket was donated to a local shelter where it will keep a baby in need warm. Please do not send anything else to our address. Our boundary remains in place." Her response was immediate and angry, finally dropping the sweet grandmother act. "I spent hours making that blanket for my grandchild and you gave it away? You're crueler than I thought. Don't worry, I won't waste my time trying to be part of your life anymore. Raise your child without family and see how that works out for you." I forwarded the email to Dr. Warren with a note, "And this is why." She responded with a simple, "Exactly. Trust yourself." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall. We found out we were having a girl and decided to name her Charlotte after Ryan's grandmother, a woman who'd shown me more warmth in the few years I'd known her before she passed than my own mother had in 30 years. We prepared the nursery, took birthing classes, read parenting books with an emphasis on emotional intelligence and secure attachment. I was determined to give my daughter everything I hadn't received. In November, 3 years after my parents had demanded $4,000 for my father's party, Brandon's baby was born. Linda sent me a photo, a beautiful baby boy they'd named Robert after our father. I looked at the picture and felt only distant happiness for them. No connection, no longing to be part of it. They were essentially strangers now who happened to share DNA with me. My mother posted extensively on social media about her first grandchild, photos of her holding the baby, captions about the joy of being a grandmother, about family being everything, about how love multiplies across generations. People who didn't know the full story commented about what a lucky baby to have such a devoted grandmother. I closed the app and didn't look again. December brought my own daughter into the world on a snowy morning 2 weeks before Christmas. Charlotte Ryan Palmer arrived healthy and perfect, with her father's dark eyes and a cry that announced her presence with authority. Holding her for the first time, feeling her tiny weight against my chest, I understood in a new way what unconditional love was supposed to feel like. How protecting her would never feel like a burden. How her needs wouldn't be in competition with anyone else's. How she would never have to earn my affection or attention. We spent Christmas in our home, just the three of us, learning to be parents in those early exhausted weeks. Taylor visited, bringing food and taking shifts so we could sleep. Aunt Linda came and cried holding Charlotte, promising to be the best great-aunt possible. Martin Chen and his wife stopped by with a generous gift and warm congratulations. We were surrounded by chosen family, by people who showed up because they wanted to, not because obligation demanded it. My parents didn't know their granddaughter had been born. They didn't know her name or her weight or that she had Ryan's eyes. They didn't know that she fed well and slept poorly and had the tiniest fingernails I'd ever seen. And I found I didn't want them to know. This precious new person didn't need their conditional love, their favoritism, their manipulation. She deserved better, and I was going to make sure she got it. In January, as Charlotte approached 6 weeks old, I received one final letter from my mother. It was brief, handwritten on her best stationery. Jessica, I'm writing one last time to let you know that if you continue on this path, you'll have no family to turn to when you need us. Everyone has limits and you've pushed us to ours. Don't come crawling back when life gets hard and you realize you need your family. The door is closing. Mom. I read it once, felt a flicker of the old fear and guilt, then let it go. Her threat was hollow because I'd already learned the truth. I didn't need them. I had Ryan and Charlotte and Taylor and Linda and a whole network of people who loved me healthily and consistently. The family I'd built was stronger than the family I'd been born into. And that door she was threatening to close? I'd already walked through it 3 years ago and never looked back. I placed the letter in a folder with all the other documentation of our estrangement, a record in case I ever needed it, then returned to my daughter. Charlotte was awake in her bassinet, making the small sounds that would soon become a full cry for food. I picked her up, settled into the nursing chair Ryan had built for me, and fed my daughter while looking out at the snowy Portland morning. This was my family now. This was what mattered. And I protected it by refusing to let toxic patterns follow me into this new chapter. My parents might never understand that, might spend the rest of their lives believing I was the problem, the difficult one, the daughter who threw away family over nothing. But I knew the truth, and so did everyone who really mattered. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who will never see your worth. Sometimes protecting your peace means accepting that some people won't understand your boundaries. Sometimes family isn't about blood but about who shows up, who stays, who loves you without requiring you to shrink yourself to fit their needs. I'd learned that lesson slowly and painfully over 3 years, but I'd learned it thoroughly. And I'd spend the rest of my life teaching it to my daughter, not through words but through example, showing her what it looked like to value yourself enough to demand better. The snow continued to fall outside, covering Portland in white, making everything clean and new. Charlotte finished nursing and fell asleep in my arms, milk-drunk and peaceful. Ryan appeared in the doorway with coffee, taking in the scene with a soft smile. Our little family, complete and whole in ours. No conditions, no competition, no manipulation. Just love, the real kind, the kind that didn't require you to earn it every single day. That was the legacy I'd leave my daughter. Not the one I'd inherited but the one I'd chosen to create. And that made all the difficulty, all the grief, all the hard choices worth it. Charlotte was 6 months old when I realized I'd stopped checking my phone anxiously for messages from my parents. The compulsion had faded so gradually I hadn't noticed its absence until one morning when Ryan commented that I seemed lighter somehow, less tense in my shoulders. He was right. The constant low-level stress of wondering when the next guilt trip would arrive, when the next manipulation would surface, had evaporated. I'd finally internalized what I'd intellectually known for years. Their opinions didn't define me anymore. Work had become deeply satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. Leading my product team gave me opportunities to mentor younger employees, and I found myself consciously creating the supportive environment I'd never had growing up. When team members succeeded, I celebrated them publicly and specifically. When they struggled, I provided resources and encouragement without making them feel inadequate. Several people had commented on my leadership style, how it made them feel valued and seen. I realized I was parenting my team the way I wished I'd been parented, and it was healing something in me I hadn't known needed healing. Taylor had become Charlotte's godmother in an informal ceremony we held in our backyard that spring. We gathered our chosen family, maybe 20 people total, and made promises about raising this child with love and community support. Aunt Linda spoke about the importance of breaking cycles and creating new traditions. Martin Chen's wife, who'd become a friend over the past year, talked about how family is defined by action, not biology. It was simple and meaningful, everything a family celebration should be. In late spring, I was offered a vice president position at a competing tech company. The role came with significant responsibility, a substantial salary increase, and the chance to build a product division from the ground up. It would mean longer hours and more travel, but Ryan and I talked it through carefully, weighing the professional opportunity against family time. We decided I should take it, that Charlotte would benefit from seeing her mother pursue ambitious goals, that we could make the logistics work with intentional planning and support. I accepted the position in June and started the new role in July. The transition was challenging but exhilarating. I was building something from nothing, hiring a team, establishing processes, making strategic decisions that would shape the company's direction. For the first time in my career, I had real authority and autonomy, and I discovered I was good at wielding both responsibly. Around Charlotte's first birthday, something unexpected happened. I was at a coffee shop near my new office when I ran into someone from my past. Vanessa Rodriguez had been my closest friend in high school, before life and geography had pulled us in different directions. We'd lost touch after college, the way friendships sometimes drift when you're building adult lives. She recognized me immediately and we spent 2 hours catching up, trading stories about careers and relationships and the strange journey of becoming who we were meant to be. When the conversation turned to family, I gave her the abbreviated version of my estrangement from my parents. She listened carefully, then said something that surprised me. I always wondered about your family dynamic. Even in high school, I noticed how your mom treated you differently than Brandon. I thought maybe it was just my imagination, but it bothered me how she'd minimize your accomplishments. You noticed that? I asked, startled. Everyone noticed, Vanessa said gently. Your close friends talked about it sometimes, trying to figure out if we should say something or if it would make things worse for you. We were teenagers, we didn't know what to do. But yeah, it was obvious to people who paid attention. This revelation sat with me for days. I'd spent so much of my life thinking maybe I was imagining the differential treatment, maybe I was being too sensitive, maybe the problem was my perception. But it had been visible to others all along. My reality had been real, witnessed, valid. The gaslighting had been so effective that I doubted my own experiences even when they were objectively observable. I reconnected with Vanessa after that coffee shop encounter, and she became part of my Portland circle. She'd built a successful career in marketing and had 2 kids of her own. We bonded over the challenges of balancing professional ambition with motherhood, over the complexity of healing from childhood wounds, while trying not to pass them to our children. She introduced me to other friends who became part of our extended network, widening the community of support around our family. Charlotte's first birthday party was everything I wanted it to be. We rented a small park pavilion and invited our chosen family, maybe 40 people who'd shown up consistently in our lives. There was a simple cake, balloons and soft pastels, activities for the handful of other children who attended. Charlotte was delighted by the attention, smearing frosting on her face while surrounded by people who genuinely loved her. No one was favored or overlooked. No one had to earn their place or prove their worth. It was just celebration, pure and uncomplicated. I posted photos from the party on social media, something I rarely did anymore, but I wanted to document this milestone. The comments were warm and enthusiastic from friends and colleagues. Aunt Linda wrote a lengthy comment about how proud she was of the life I'd built. Martin Chun commented about what a lucky little girl Charlotte was to have parents so committed to breaking harmful cycles. I noticed my mother had apparently been monitoring my page despite our estrangement, because within hours of posting, her comment appeared. Looks like a lovely party for my granddaughter that I wasn't invited to. I hope you're teaching her the importance of family loyalty. I deleted the comment immediately and blocked her. Count, something I should have done years ago. Her attempt to poison a joyful moment with guilt and passive aggression was predictable, but still disappointing. Some part of me had apparently still hoped she might evolve, might recognize her role in our estrangement, might change. Blocking her felt like closing a door I'd left slightly ajar just in case. Now it was fully shut, and I felt relieved rather than sad. Ryan got a major promotion that fall, becoming a partner at his architecture firm. We celebrated at the same restaurant where we'd had our first date 7 years earlier, nostalgic and grateful for how far we'd come. We talked about maybe having another child, about whether Charlotte should have a sibling or if our family felt complete as it was. We didn't make any decisions that night, just held the question gently between us, knowing we had time. Work continued to be demanding but rewarding. The product division I was building was exceeding expectations, and I was developing a reputation in the tech industry as an innovative leader. I was invited to speak at conferences, to contribute articles to industry publications, to mentor other women navigating leadership roles. My career had become something I was genuinely proud of, not because it proved anything to my parents, but because it reflected my own values and capabilities. In December, 4 years after the party where my father had publicly excluded me from recognition, Aunt Linda called with news. Your father had another heart attack. More serious this time. He's in ICU. The prognosis isn't certain yet. Your mother is asking if you'll come. I sat with the information for a long time after we hung up. This was potentially the last chance to see my father alive, to say things that couldn't be said later. The old conditioning screamed at me that I should go, that deathbeds trumped all boundaries, that I'd regret it forever if I didn't. But I'd learned to question those automatic responses, to examine whether they served me or just served old patterns. I talked it through with Ryan and with Dr. Warren in an emergency session. We explored what going would mean, what staying away would mean, what I actually wanted versus what I felt obligated to want. In the end, I decided not to go to the hospital. My father had shown me through his actions over 4 years that he wasn't interested in real reconciliation, just in me returning to my assigned role. Showing up at his deathbed wouldn't change that. It would just give my mother ammunition to use against me later. I sent flowers to the ICU with a card that read simply, Dad, thinking of you during this difficult time. Wishing you peace and recovery. Jessica. It felt adequate, appropriate, boundaried. I didn't call. I didn't visit. I sat with the guilt and the grief and let myself feel both without acting on them. My father survived. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital, underwent bypass surgery, and eventually recovered enough to go home with significant lifestyle restrictions. Throughout his hospitalization, my mother apparently told people I'd refused to visit my dying father out of spite, that I was so bitter about ancient history that I couldn't show basic human decency. Aunt Linda defended me to people who asked, but she couldn't control the entire narrative. I had to accept that some people would always believe my mother's version, and their opinion of me wasn't something I could control or fix. Brandon reached out again in the new year, his message more honest than previous attempts. Jess, I don't really understand what happened between you and Mom and Dad. They say it's because you're bitter and holding grudges. You say they treated you unfairly. I don't know who's right. But we're siblings and I miss having a sister. Can we maybe try to have a relationship separate from them? Just you and me? I appreciated the attempt at independence from our parents, but I recognized the problem immediately. Brandon had never acknowledged the differential treatment. He'd never examined his role in the family dynamic or questioned why he'd always been centered. Having a relationship with him would mean constantly navigating his relationship with our parents, constantly biting my tongue about observations he wasn't ready to hear. It would be exhausting and ultimately unfulfilling. I responded carefully. Brandon, I appreciate you reaching out. I don't think we can have a relationship separate from Mom and Dad because the issues between us stem from the family dynamic we grew up in. Unless you're willing to examine that dynamic honestly and acknowledge the differential treatment, we don't have common ground to build on. I wish you well, but I'm not interested in a surface-level relationship that requires me to pretend everything was fine. Take care. He didn't respond and I didn't expect him to. The truth was uncomfortable, and Brandon had spent his whole life being protected from discomfort. I couldn't force him to see what he wasn't ready to see. Charlotte was approaching 2 years old, developing language and personality at a rapid pace. She was curious and determined, traits I recognized from myself at that age. But unlike me, she was growing up in an environment where her curiosity was encouraged, where her determination was celebrated, rather than seen as stubbornness. She had 2 parents who were emotionally present and available, who validated her feelings, who provided structure without rigidity. She would never have to wonder if she was loved as much as a sibling. She would never have to earn affection or attention. She was simply loved, completely and unconditionally. Watching her thrive gave me a strange mixture of joy and grief. Joy for her, for the childhood she was experiencing. Grief for myself, for the child I'd been who deserved that same uncomplicated love and never received it. Dr. Warren assured me this was normal, that parenting often brings up unresolved childhood issues. The key was processing them rather than projecting them onto Charlotte. In the spring, Vanessa invited me to join a group she'd started for professional women balancing careers and motherhood. We met monthly at various restaurants, sharing strategies and struggles and support. The group became another layer of community, another circle of people who understood the particular challenges of trying to do multiple things well simultaneously. Several of the women had complicated family backgrounds, and we bonded over the shared experience of healing from childhood while trying to parent differently. One evening at the group, a woman named Patricia shared that she'd recently gone no contact with her mother, after years of trying to fix an unfixable relationship. She was struggling with guilt and grief and doubt, questioning whether she'd done the right thing. The group rallied around her with validation and support, and I found myself sharing parts of my own story I rarely talked about in detail. Afterward, several women approached me privately to say my story had helped them recognize patterns in their own families, had given them permission to consider boundaries they'd been afraid to set. I realized my experience, as painful as it had been, had value beyond my own healing. By being open about estrangement, about choosing myself over toxic family obligation, I was helping normalize what too many people believed was shameful or wrong. There was power in that, in transforming private pain into communal wisdom. Work continued to expand my influence and impact. The product division I'd built was now generating significant revenue for the company, and I was being courted by venture capital firms to start my own company. The idea was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Ryan and I discussed it extensively, weighing the risk and potential reward, considering how it would affect our family life. We decided to explore the possibility seriously, to take meetings and develop a business plan and see if entrepreneurship might be the next chapter. By summer, I'd committed to starting my own company. I spent months in intensive planning, building a founding team, securing initial funding. It meant leaving the stability of a VP role for the uncertainty of entrepreneurship, but I was ready for the challenge. Ryan took on more of the childcare responsibilities to give me time to focus, and we hired a part-time nanny to cover gaps. It required coordination and flexibility and constant communication, but we made it work because we were genuinely partners in building our life together. Charlotte turned 3 that December, now fully verbal and opinionated about everything. She had strong preferences for books and foods and activities, and we honored those preferences while maintaining necessary boundaries. She was developing empathy and creativity, characteristics we nurtured through how we interacted with her. She would sometimes ask about grandparents, having observed that other children had them, and we explained simply that some families are big and some are small, that ours was small but very loving. As another year turned, 5 years since my 30th birthday had been ignored, I found myself taking stock of everything that had changed. I'd gone from desperate for my parents' approval to genuinely indifferent to their opinion. I'd built a thriving career on my own terms. I'd created a family with Ryan and Charlotte that operated on completely different principles than the one I'd grown up in. I'd cultivated friendships and community based on mutual respect and reciprocity. I'd healed enough to help others recognize their own need for healing. The grief still surfaced occasionally, usually at unexpected moments. Watching Charlotte interact with Aunt Linda, and wishing she had more grandparents who loved her that way. Achieving professional milestones and feeling that flicker of wanting to share them with parents who'd be proud. Seeing other families at the park, multiple generations playing together, and feeling the absence of what I'd never had. But the grief was manageable now, no longer overwhelming, just another feeling to acknowledge and process. My company launched officially that spring, a SaaS platform for product teams that solved problems I'd experienced throughout my career. The launch was successful beyond expectations, and we secured series of funding within 6 months. I was suddenly not just an employee but a founder, with all the responsibility and opportunity that entailed. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done professionally, but also the most aligned with who I'd become. In quiet moments, I sometimes wondered if my parents knew about my success, if they'd Googled me or heard through the grapevine about the company I'd started. Part of me imagined them reading about me in industry publications, finally recognizing my worth now that external validation confirmed it. But I knew that thinking was a trap, still seeking their approval in subtle ways. Whether they knew or not, whether they were proud or not, whether they regretted their choices or not, none of it mattered anymore. I'd built something meaningful without them, and that was its own validation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.